Okay, I think we can start. Welcome, everybody. Welcome, Rachel. And thank you to be here today to this new Editorya event. And so I think we are waiting somebody else, but we have a really big number of attendees today to this event. Really, really interesting, related to crime analysis. So just short introduction about the topic today, which would be the promising future of crime analysis in effective policing. And Rachel Boba Santos, today we present two important books. The first is Crime Analysis with Crime Mapping, and the second is Stratified Policing. Two important books in this field, and thank you for this really great contribution we are offering to us, to the European, but to the whole world community of crime analysts today. Thank you, Rachel. I'll leave to you a presentation of your experience, background, and so on, because I think it's the best way to introduce yourself and what you did in this field and for this field in the past, and actually you are doing. So I think that after me, that I represent the European Forensic Institute, there will be some words from Sam Steiner, from the European Association of Crime Analysts. Sam, thank you to be here.
Hello, Andreas, and welcome everyone on this new session of Editorya, and a warmly welcome to my old friend, Dr. Rachel P. Santos. Rachel, it's so great to have you here on board. You are one of the best known people in the field of crime analysis all over the world. And only talking about your experience would take at least 6 hours, but only if I speak very fast. So it's up to you now to cut it down a little bit, so there's still some space for presenting your books. Rachel, thank you once again for being with us, and the floor is yours.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you for the nice introductions. Just a little bit about my background, and then what I have today is I'm going to not talk about the book so much as I'll give you the overview, and then we're going to talk about some concepts, and I'm going to talk about how my books will inform you about those concepts, but hopefully a little taste of the content will get you interested and even just in the field and in the research that I do. So I've been working with police for a long time now, since the mid-90s. I don't want to say how old I am, but I started as a crime analyst in a local police department as I was working on my PhD in Arizona, which is out west in the United States. And I did that for about 5 years. And as I was doing that, we trained a lot of interns. We brought students in. I taught some classes, and there wasn't any real, substantive, far-reaching textbook where a lot of the things that we did on a daily basis were written down. I had the opportunity in 2000 to go to Washington, D.C. and work at a think tank there called the Police Foundation. It's now called the National Policing Institute. And I worked on grants, and a lot of those grants were supporting crime analysis. And through that, I wrote a lot of different guidebooks. I think one of the guidebooks is actually referred to today through the IACA. I can't believe it. I saw it the other day, but and that really got me thinking and writing and developing some of the standard types of concepts. Again, things that we've done for a long time, just hadn't been written down. When I went to Florida Atlantic University in around 2003, now as an academic, I had the time, because in DC, I just didn't have the time to do a bigger project. As an academic, I'm required to write. So I wrote the book. First edition of Crime Analysis and Crime Mapping came out in 2005. And it was really, I think when I originally wrote the proposal, it was supposed to be twice as long as it was. I was trying to put too much in, but my publisher kind of focused it in, and I was very happy with it. It's gone through now. It's on its 5th edition. That came out last year. And through that time, when I was in Florida, I worked a lot with police departments as an academic, and you'll see through this. And in the second book, I'm going to talk about stratified policing I'm actually second author with my husband. And that book is about implementing institutionalizing, implementing crime reduction in a police department. And so that's written a lot shorter. It's written for police leaders. And my husband's first author, because he's a retired police commander after 22 years in a police department in Florida. So this is based on our research on us implementing stratified policing. So those two books they're companion books in the sense of one's really the crime analysis and the foundations and how to do things. And the other book is about how to implement proactive crime reduction systematically with the foundation of crime analysis. So crime analysis is really important, that too. So today I'm going to go ahead and share my presentation. And like I said, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through some more formal slides, but please feel free, because I know this is more of a discussion, but I think there's a lot of visuals with crime analysis. So it's nice to see visuals, but please, you can stop me if we have a chat, if you want to throw some questions in the chat. Hopefully I'll catch them. I'll keep my eye out. Sometimes I get talking and I get see it as well as I should, but and I'll answer any questions or to kind of have that discussion, but we have plenty of time for that. And hopefully you'll find this entertaining. At the end, I'm going to go through the content, and at the end of the presentation, I will talk about the chapters in each book to just kind of talk about how those inform the things that that I presented on already. All right. Let's see here. So let me go ahead and share my screen. All right. So I'm going to turn this off so I don't see myself through the whole talk. All right. So again, the talk is Promising Future Crime Analysis and Effective Policing. I'm a professor of criminal justice and co-director of the Center for Police Practice, Policy and Research here at Radford University. And there's the covers of the book. And I didn't give the specific information. You can just type my name and both of these books will come up. And just make sure with the crime analysis and crime mapping that you get the 5th edition, the most recent one, because I made some really good changes that really kind of bring in all the products and things are updated, but it really brings that the stratified policing book and the crime analysis. Those two books really come together in this last edition. All right, so a little bit more about my background. I just want to tell you kind of where I'm from, because obviously the world is a big place. So Radford University is in Virginia. And so here I am. My red dot is the crime analysis map, right? And then within Virginia, this is where we are. So Radford is in the Appalachian Mountains, very close to the Appalachian Trail. It's beautiful in the fall. And here's a picture of our university. You can see kind of the mountains. We have I actually grew up and was raised out west of the United States, which is huge mountains, kind of like central, well, nothing like the Alps, but here in Virginia, beautiful rolling hills. And like I said, the falls are gorgeous. I just love living there. So I just give you a little context. All right, so back to the presentation. Now, really, I'm going to start. Let me make sure here. All right, so I just make sure my chat questions. And I apologize. I know it's 3 o'clock in the afternoon for you guys. It's first thing in the morning for me, so I apologize if I have to clear my throat a little bit. All right, so they're really, just as a context, there are 3 reasons for crime analysis that we do, and this is just obviously we can have an argument. There are little details here and there, but overview why we do crime analysis. To support police, but the first thing is really situational awareness. So a lot of things that we do, a lot of products, and a lot of things we can automate, right? Especially these days, maybe not back 30 years ago when we had to do lists and tables and all and things by hand. But situational awareness is the idea that we provide information. We provide information to people in the police department, in the community, in the agency that helps them think about their personal, the environment that they work, just creating, how many things like, well, how many calls were at this address, kind of what's a summary of crime over the last month, over the last year, what are our general statistics? So there's not really anything actual, and it's really just information. They look at it, they're like, oh, okay, I understand this, and then they put it down. And that it's important for us to understand the difference between that and what we're going to talk about. But situational awareness isn't anything action oriented. It's just information. What's nice, again, that we can automate a lot of this stuff now, where people can do it themselves. This is where, as an analyst, you want to maybe do dashboards where people can look up, oh, what are the crimes in my beat for the past 2 years, and it's just a list. They look at it. It's not anything you have to do because there's not any analysis that goes into it. It's just a list. The second thing here is operations. So in crime analysis, a lot of what we do, and maybe not on a day-to-day basis, as much as periodically, right? We do schedule, we help with resource allocation, we help with redistricting, the basic operational things, maybe help with data, trying to make sure that the RMS and the CAD systems are what we need them to be, more dealing with the operations side of the department, maybe helping to evaluate certain things that aren't having to do with crime. And then the last thing here, which I think is the most important, this is all the work that I do is in this area, particularly is crime reduction. So analysis for crime reduction is the idea that the things that we produce have to be it's the same data that we use for situational awareness and even in the operations when we're doing resource allocation, but we use it in a different way. We take the information and then we analyze it and we make conclusions. And then those conclusions are put into a product that's action oriented, where people they look at it and they just don't put it aside. They look at it. Also, they don't look at it and have to analyze it themselves. They look at it and there are some obvious things that can be done for crime reduction from that product itself. The other side is that they also, in crime reduction, there are also things that we evaluate. So, all right, we have this product, we're doing something, we're responding, we're trying to reduce crime, we being the police. And then crime analysis then is part of this crime reduction reason is evaluating whether those responses are working. So it's much different than situational awareness. And I think a lot of times police departments and leaders, but also crime analysts get those two things confused because what happens is we provide information that should be for situational awareness, and then police commanders take that and they try to do the analysis themselves because it's just information. It doesn't help them. It's not action. So they're like, okay, where should we go? What should we do with this information? Because it's just a summary. And that's really the analyst's job. So that's an important distinction. When you think about your job, think about what you do that's just information and what you do. And can you do a better job and provide more analysis? And I'm sure you do analysis. It's just, I think if you think about this, there are probably some more things you could do. And bring that into that crime reduction circle here. All right, so I'm going to kind of head down just focus on that circle because that's again where almost all my work is. Obviously, I give advice and I teach about situational awareness products and what those are. And obviously, there are different formats and different ways to deliver information, which is a huge part of crime analysis. So that's a big piece, but most of my research and work with analysts and police departments focusing on the crime reduction aspect. So just generally, and again, these are really important concepts for both books that we go over. So I'm going to just briefly talk about them here, but we give the whole review of the literature and a lot of the background in a practical way. I think that's important. In a practical way, the crime analysis book is a textbook for undergraduates and is more detailed because it's a textbook for graduates and undergraduates, but it's also a book for crime analysts. So it's pretty detailed. The Stratified Policing book is a book for police managers, leaders, and executives, but also for graduate level, like a seminar, like a policing seminar, because there's a lot of leadership things in there. But let's focus on where both books talk about what works, and we know from the evidence and from research and meta-analysis that there are 4 approaches that police can make a difference in crime reduction, right? And those approaches are place-based, so that's we're identifying places and areas and focusing our efforts there. Person-focused, which is obviously, let's see, make sure here. All right. Person-focused, where we're looking at a small proportion of area in a jurisdiction accounts for a lot of the crime. A small proportion of individual offenders that commit a disproportionate amount of crime. So when we focus on places and people, we can have an impact on and reduce crime. Now that makes sure we have to select the right kind of approaches in the right context, and not everything works the same across the board. But that's important. Thinking about those things, you can see it's obvious as crime analysts, it's obvious. If those two different approaches work, then what can we do as analysts? We have to help find places that are disproportionately hit with crime and persons as well. And person focus can also be victims, right? So we look at victimization because we have a small proportion of victims that account for a large proportion of the victimizations, especially when we start to look at that within context. Community-based approaches. This means when police focus on increasing trust, legitimacy, and relationship with the police, that works as well. Not so much at reducing crime as well as place-based and person-focused, but it does just that idea of you can increase legitimacy and trust. And when you do that successfully in a police department, it makes those other approaches easier. So for police, when you have a better relationship with the community, you get more cooperation, they may talk to you more, they may just prevent crime themselves more because they trust what you're telling them. So it's a very important aspect of crime reduction. And the last thing is problem solving. The idea that we go through a systematic process of scanning, analyzing, responding, and assessing in order to really focus in on our problems and develop our problems, the place-based, person-focused, and make sure that the responses and the things that police are doing are tailored and effective. So basically, all of these things is what the research experts talk about. All these things are required together to be the most effective, to get the best bang for a buck in policing and crime reduction. That's pretty difficult. That's not an easy task. It's a lot going on. It's not just about, hey, let's do a top 50 list of offenders in our jurisdiction, and then we're going to quote go after them. It's not that. That maybe is identifying offenders and developing strategies specifically for them, say focused deterrence, but that by itself doesn't reduce crime. Place-based by itself is not the most effective. It is very effective, and all these things are, but it has to be done together. Again, like I said, with the community-based approaches is really important. So the challenge is how to bring these things all together, right? And change police culture so that we do this in a systematic way. But let me just talk real quick about the role with that. Crime analysis is huge, is very important. And I'll kind of go through this, but just breaking down the idea. I'm sorry, real quick, the idea that I think some people, whether it's crime analysis or technology, say, all right, we're going to get a crime analyst, therefore we can reduce crime. Or having a crime analyst, hey, we have an analyst, we can reduce crime. But you guys know that is you're not the ones out in the field implementing the strategies. It's necessary, but it's not in it. That is not going to be the answer completely, right? So when I have an article, and I talk a little bit about this in my book, how crime analysis is the diagnosis. It's not the cure. So, and this is a lot for analysts to understand and to think about your job in this way. I think it's important because I don't think we think it's as give it enough credit, because crime analysis is really important, but it's not so important that if you have that ability, it's the answer, right? So let me just kind of quickly go through an analogy here. Love analogies, but this one really kind of puts crime analysis in the whole picture of crime reduction and how we're trying to help our community. So if we take medicine and crime reduction, so the idea is that we're trying to cure a patient, right? The medicine is trying to cure the patient. In crime reduction, we're trying to make the community better because it's sick with crime. And so the first thing that we do, and this is just a very simple example, and I had the picture there that the MRI, the first example is we have an MRI and I have a problem, say I have an issue with my foot. And so I go to the doctor, and my doctor, who is evidence-based, says, all right, we want to be data-driven. It's not just going to be whatever I think it is by looking at your foot. I'm going to send you to an MRI. And I'm going to get that analysis, and that's going to help me treat you. So in crime, in policing, we have data and we have software. So an MRI is the machine that collects the data, right? And so when that machine, the technician running the machine, is not the person who interprets the report, right? This is somebody who's just running the machine. They know how to do that. Then that report is sent to an actual doctor. The doctor is the one who reads that report from the MRI. And so in crime reduction, that analogy, the crime analyst is the doctor who reads the data and the software to make recommendations, right? The radiologist doesn't talk to the patient necessarily. Most often doesn't, maybe through a report, but doesn't have that direct relationship. The radiologist provides that to the treating doctor. So as crime analysts, we're the doctors who provide our information, our interpretation, our results from the data to the police. And then the police have to select, and we can help them, just like a radiologist might suggest things. If they're a doctor too, they might suggest a specific strategy based on that results. And then the treatment has to be administered, right? So just because you select a treatment that shows to work, or an evidence-based strategy that shows to work, like hotspots policing, like focus deterrence, doesn't mean that it will work in this context. The treating doctor and the patient have to take the medicine. It has to be implemented correctly. And that's where stratified policing comes in, is that implementation, because it's not easy. Right. And even to just get people to take their medication on a regular basis. They may take it, but maybe they're supposed to take it every day, but they take it, well, I forgot, and this and that, and it's not going to do what it needs to do. So the ultimate goal here, obviously, is crime reduction. So if we look back where crime analysis fits, it's important. It starts the whole process, but it isn't the end of the process, definitely. All right. So in terms of the problem solving process, kind of flipping this and looking the other way, when we're talking about Sarah. And this is just a quick example of the role of crime analysis. So when we're in problem solving, we think about this, we focus all those efforts for what works. We need to focus. That is the theme throughout, right? We need to focus police. It needs to be specific. It needs to be situational. So how do we do that? We do that through crime analysis, period. We identify the problems. The way we identify problems in crime analysis helps police departments prioritize them. Then once they're prioritized and selected, then we analyze and tell them why. What is this problem? What are the different facets of it? What are we seeing that may be different from other communities? How is that tailored, right? This is that the MRI report. And then the implementation, the police do, but we have additional analysis, right? So we're still doing analysis. When should we do this, and where specifically should we do it? Who are the people to contact right now? So even then, the role of analysis is important in that implementation. And then finally, the evaluation is really important, because we really police don't evaluate as much as they should. But in crime analysis, it's not just looking at crime stats. We have to measure things very specifically that makes sense. All right. Now I'm just going to go a little bit further here and talk a little bit about stratified policing is basically kind of how that then that implementation side, how stratified policing is a model that can make it work, can make crime reduction work, and crime analysis is a key component. So the biggest thing here is, if we have to be focused, we have to just distinguish between short and long-term problems when we're thinking about crime reduction, because everything isn't the same, and the responses that we know from evidence aren't the same when we're dealing with short-term and long-term issues. So in crime analysis, then we need to create action-oriented products, like I said before, versus information, and we need to do evaluation-oriented accountability products versus statistics. Statistics, a lot of times the way they're done are situational awareness. They're not evaluation. They're not crime reduction focused. We may use them, attempt to use them for crime reduction evaluation, but that's not really what they're doing. So we have to think about that. And stratified policing, we create and we talk about that. I have specific products in that book that talk about general statistics versus a specific type of chart, report, statistic mechanism to evaluate the problem. And overall consistency. So we need to make sure things are consistent over time, across rank, across people. So people aren't doing whatever else they want. They're doing what the model, what we want them to do to make this work in the agency. So basically, stratified policing is a business model that is based on something that's already successful in policing, to make sure all these things happen. And I'm just going to go over this quickly so that we have maybe some time at the end. But when Roberto and I were writing, we've been working and working with police for about 20 years, implementing stratified policing. In 2020, we had a guidebook before then, but our book Stratified Policing was published in 2020, and really, it's amazing how you talk and you train and you work with the agencies, but when you sit down to write things down to try to communicate, the writing of the book is trying to communicate your thoughts and your ideas without seeing people's reaction, without getting feedback in a training situation, in a presentation situation. You really have to think it through. You really have to, and it made us, which is a lot of fun. Being married is a lot of fun, sitting in our office and going back and forth, but to think about how to get these points across easily, quickly. Again, this is a book that people that chiefs have told us, people have told us they can read in a weekend, which is awesome. The crime analysis book you can't read in a weekend. It's not meant to be that way. But and really, what Roberto, being a cop for 22 years, he came up with this analogy, which is so. It's just easy. It's an easy way to think of it. I think it clicks. So let's think about calls for service. And you guys are all, you're in Europe. I'm in the United States. The way police departments answer calls for service across the world. Now, in some countries, it may be different, depending where you are. But in most places in Europe, in the United States, and Australia, and we all use the same process, which is, dispatch call. Out an officer goes. There's certain things that happen. They write a report, right? You close the call. The data is produced, and all that is a business model, and it's institutionalized. A police officer can go from one department to another, and it's basically the same. But what's important about that is that the whole system of calls for service and how we respond is based on the seriousness of the call. So that seriousness of the call dictates what happens next. If it's a barking dog, if it's a low-level crime, certain things happen, right? One officer, they take care of it. If it's a shooting or a group fight or something like that, there's more than one, or a homicide, a lot more things happen, right? So it's the seriousness of the call that dictates who responds, the responses that are required, the expectations of the individuals who are there at the scene or who are coming to the scene, right? Whether it's a SWAT call out, whether there's a canine coming out, whether it's a social services folks that come out, who's accountable? Is it the officer? Is it the highest rank on scene? Who's accountable for that? And again, individual call, and all that whole entire process is stratified, right? So the idea here is that depending on the call, there are policies that dictate these different calls. There are, that's formal, there's informal things that everybody knows who's supposed to do what. And when that doesn't happen, people are like, hey, why isn't this happening? So the idea here is, and the book really gets into, Stratified Policing book gets more into this and how it impacts the culture change and how these things are trying to overcome some of the cultural challenges in a police department to implement crime reduction. But just to kind of flip that in terms of our calls for service, how does stratified policing work? Well, what we do is we take that idea and we say, all right, we have immediate short-term and long-term problems. These are our call for service types. And what we need to do is we need to proactively identify and dispatch them into the system, into our business model. So how do we do that? Now we have what works, and that tells us how to identify and what we want to look for in terms of the problems. And what we do is we have two things. Crime analysis is our quote dispatcher. And let's think about that as we're going to identify proactively. These are action-oriented products that sends folks out depending on the type of problem. That will dictate who does what. We also on this flip side, and in that side, I'm sorry, just to go back. And I say, voice of the chief or voice of the executive here is because this is not a crime analyst deciding what's going on. It is just like a call for service. The chief or the head of the agency decides how the agency responds, what problems they respond to, what types of calls they do. Same thing here. For evaluation, the crime analysts are the truth tellers. And what that means is that there's one set of evaluation, whether it's numbers, whether it's a process, however we're evaluating, it's one set, and that's the crime analyst. So that people aren't, again, it's dictated by the agency, it's dictated by the executives on what is success, but it's the analysts who do that, and there's no argument. So you can see that it's the crime analysis is very important. Stratified policing, it kind of starts and it evaluates it. Now, in terms of the rest of it, the stratification, similar to what police do for calls for service, minor things, the more immediate types of things, cops can handle on their own. But as things become more complex, higher ranks take care of it, right? And more people become involved. And that's what this next triangle is more people become involved here. So as we're looking, if we see more long-term problems, say a long-term problem area, now we've got a higher level commander who's responsible for dealing with that, but everybody helps out, right? And in stratified policing as well, we have accountability that's just flows like the police department rank structure, and accountability meetings that kind of follow with daily meetings between lower level folks. They already do those, right? That's already institutionalized with briefings, roll calls, weekly meetings, and monthly meetings. So weekly meetings are more action oriented, where, okay, what are we doing? How are we responding? Crime analysis give us the dates and times and let us, do, we need to get in there and make sure things are happening. And then on a monthly basis, that's where we're evaluating a lot of the things that we're doing. All right. So real quickly, and I know I could talk a lot, but let me see. I think we have a question here. All right. So let me just give you a quick example here, which is the crime pattern bulletin, and how this kind of fits into the stratified policing model. The crime pattern, right, is a very common crime analysis product. I think in almost every police department you go to around the world, you're looking for we're finding patterns, and we're publishing patterns, where there's an individual suspect that's done 5 robberies, whether it's 5 residential burglaries in the last 2 weeks in a certain area, right? This is short-term identifying pattern. We put them into a bulletin. But it's often underestimated in its importance, in the sense of, analysts will put out bulletins, it's just got everything on there and they just throw it out there, and people respond, they don't respond. The biggest complaint is whatever happens to it. I don't know, is anybody even using it? I'm not sure. But the idea too is that patterns are proactively identified. So when analysts are doing this right, they're not just waiting for detectives and different people to say, hey, I think there's a pattern over here, can you put a bulletin out? Analysts should be proactively identifying, right? So this is that call for service in stratified policing. This is a huge piece of that short-term strata of stratified policing, where crime analysts are proactively identifying patterns, right? And when they do that, they provide an action-oriented, standardized product that's in a predictable format, so that people know what to expect. It's short, direct, and only the necessary information that they need. And this is important in stratified policing because, we don't want it to be situational awareness. We need it only to be what they need. And this is important for the usefulness of it. It should stand on its own without explanation. And like I said, action oriented. And in this particular case, the pattern bulletin, the way we kind of, the way this works in stratified policing is it does both things. It's the bulletin itself is action oriented and evaluation oriented. Let me just quickly go through what I'm talking about. So this is what the bulletin looks like. This is this template, standardized format. This is what I recommend in my book. All these different components are walked through. I think it's chapter 11 in my book, right? So real quickly, we'll talk about the different components. Everything on this bulletin is important. So here we've got accountability information, a kind of admin. So when is the bulletin? What's the number? When was it released? Updated is when there's we release it. And then if there's a new crime, that's when it was updated with new crime. In stratified policing, what this expires means is what we recommend that it's part of evidence-based strategy is that the police do directed patrol in a microtime hotspot for 2 weeks, because that's what research shows, that you're going to get the best bang for your buck. So literally on the bulletin now we say, all right, it was released on June 6th, and you can see it had 4 crimes on June 6th. And then the analyst kept looking, which is the evaluation component. In this small area, in this 0.808 mile radius, we found 2 more crimes. So I republished it on the 10th. So now we're going to respond 14 days. I'm going to look at it for another week after that for the evaluation to see if crimes go away, because if they go away within that time period, we're done. It's successful. That's the evaluation. If it doesn't, and like I said, we have an update, then then everybody knows we have to keep responding. So it's like in the moment evaluation, this product in and of itself does both of those things. And just as a little aside, or not aside, it's really important that when it's updated, there's an A. If there's more crimes, it would be a B, a C, a D. So the book talks a lot more about how that works. But just some of the other components real quickly, we've got the title that tells everybody exactly what it is, what they're looking at. If it's a series, microtime hotspot, that's important. The communication, very simple. The summary here doesn't give it's not situational awareness. This is an analysis. It's not, I'm not giving every single time that all these 6 crimes occurred in this. This is a summary. So it happened overnight on various days of the week. That's what we need to know. That's action oriented. When we can patrol, right? What do they attack? What are they getting? Vehicles parked on the residential driveways. We don't have to know what type of vehicles at this point. This is a summary. Action oriented. Here's the map that says when the crimes are, the number of the crimes, and the general area to patrol. Here's just a list of cases with some information here, but this is all, it depends on the crime pattern. It should tell them a little bit more about things, but again, should be specific enough, but not just everything. Here, it's just important. So this particular bulletin, when we talk about the map, that's place-based, right? They're directed patrol in that area. We know that's effective. Now we've got known offenders. The analyst looks up the known offenders, people who live in the area of the pattern, and we know people that offenders commit crimes near where they live. So this is again evidence-based. So now the analyst is providing specific people that have been arrested for this crime, who may be out of jail or recently out of jail or whatever it is. And these are people who may not be suspects, but people who we should maybe talk to. And then same thing with the FI information, field intelligence, that now that the police have collected, that the analyst looks for and provides on this bulletin as action oriented. So people can actually go out, talk to these people and see if they know anything about this pattern. So as you can see, this whole bulletin itself is action oriented, and then it has that evaluation. The whole process of analyzing this pattern is an evaluation as well with the accountability information in that upper right hand corner. I know I went through that fairly quickly, but it's all in the book. So just to wrap things up here. So what is that was just one example we have, for each of the strata in stratified policing. There's that whole process. It goes through that process of identifying responses that are evidence-based, and then how each thing is evaluated specifically. So the future crime analysis is necessary, right? So I teach students and I get them excited. I mean, you're all working analysts, so you know that you're needed and is necessary, but as a student, they're excited about getting into the field because, in the United States right now, there are more and more analysts, not just being hired, but new positions being created because we know that it's a necessity. Maybe not everybody's using crime analysis as they should. And that's, the point of my research. It will never be replaced by technology. Even this AI stuff, I don't care. We're always going to need people because the data are imperfect, and we need to understand our communities. We need to understand the data and the errors and how to look at that. We're all and pattern analysis. I think technology gets us to a certain point to help us, right, to automate certain things. But in my view, I'm comfortable saying that it will never be replaced by crime analysts, will never be replaced by technology. We need to improve our quality and usefulness, though, and that's why I give the crime pattern example, and I can give you a ton more examples of a pattern bulletin that is not as useful because it's a summary. It's just too much information. It's confusing. It's just too much on the page. It's 10 pages long. I think that's really important that we focus and try to improve that. And we can increase in legitimacy in the organization of crime analysis. That kind of gets to the rest of it as educating, and I'll get to it, educating police leaders on what crime analysts and crime analysis should do and can do, and what the purpose is not, right? There's some things, and even just a simple map of the crime last month, people think that it should be that's action oriented. It's not, and that education is important to know when to use crime analysis and when not. All right, so speaking of education, this is just real quickly in terms of the crime analysis book. I just have the chapters here. I'm not going to go through everything. So the first section is really about the basis. So theoretical foundations, I talked about, offenders commit crimes near where they live. We talk about, crime is concentrated by place. So that's all covered in chapter 2. Evidence-based policing and problem solving, guess what's covered there, right? And then we're talking about the short-term, long-term crime analysis in chapter 4 there. The next section is the basics about data, technology, and some of the products and communication, the techniques that crime analysts should use. Again, this is for students and analysts. And then this section, chapters 8 through 11, are all about patterns and repeat calls for service, that short-term crime reduction, analysis and evaluation. And then the last part of the book goes over statistics and trends, talks a little bit about weekly, monthly, with the best ways to look at statistics, which are situational awareness, how to understand trends, and then the long-term problem analysis of different, going through place, temporal analysis, offenders, that kind of stuff. And then the last chapter is the evaluation of long-term problems and crime reduction goals. All right, so you can see how that fits. And now in terms of the stratified policing book, again, it's shorter, it's more to the point, it's very less academic in the sense of the language. The language is very like, hey, conversational, and we did that on purpose. And so obviously there's an introduction, and so we go into, again, a kind of short, sweet, to the point. Both of those, the theory and what works in proactive policing, that's an important foundation for this. And I think this is an important chapter that's not at all in my book, because it's, or in the crime analysis book, because it's for crime analysts. This is about the police culture and the organizational barriers to implementing crime reduction. That's a particularly important chapter for police leaders and for crime analysts too. And you can see, I mean, I would argue that every police department has at least some of these, and I don't care where in the world you are. And so those are important, because that is what, in recognizing those challenges in police culture, is what gets us to how stratified policing can overcome those challenges. And then we have the framework. And again, and after chapter 4, it goes into implementation. So how do we develop crime reduction goals? What are they for stratified policing? If you remember, chapter 15 of my book goes about how to measure those goals, right? And then we've got immediate crime reduction, significant incidents, repeat incidents, and crime patterns. So chapters 7 and 8 are covered in chapters 8 through 11 in my book, in terms of the analysis piece of it. The long-term crime reduction, problem offenders, locations, and areas, right, is covered in that last section of my book. And here in stratified policing, accountability and meeting structure obviously is particularly, part of that business model approach. All right, so I think, again, those are the pictures of the book. Here's my contact information, email, and our website for our center. And there's a lot more information, articles. In terms of the book, there's links to how to get to the books and all that. So I think, I guess the best, let's see, analysts should report to good question, Sherry. So here's a question here. Can you give some reasons why an analyst should report to the highest position in the agency as possible? Good question. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing and to answer your question. All right. In the context, and this is what we recommend. So as you can see, in stratified policing, analysts are the truth tellers. And they're the voice of the chief, in the sense of they're putting out information that are going to make people, if you have action-oriented products, the product comes out and people are going to do something with that. Stratified policing, they're required. It's part of the policy. It's part of what they do, right? But it comes from the chief, because the chief sets the rules, the analyst does it. On the flip side, with the evaluation, the analyst is then telling everybody whether what they're doing is working. So, hey, commander, you're dealing with a problem area. You're reporting out to the chief that you're supposed to do A, B, and you're doing A, B, and C, right? And now the analyst is producing statistics that say, yes, it's working what you're doing or not. So it makes sense that you would not be reporting to that commander who's then being evaluated, right? So it makes sense for the analyst to be a couple things, not buried in the agency, because we value crime analysis, so it should be at a higher, it should report to a higher rank. And it also should report to a division of the police department that's not patrol and that's not criminal investigations, because those two are going to be held accountable in stratified policing, right? So we don't want the analysts, it puts them in a really uncomfortable position, especially even if they're civilian or sworn, doesn't matter, because if you're in the chain of command of someone who's being held accountable for what you're doing every day. That's just uncomfortable, and it's just not the best way. That's not a good business model. So the analyst should be in more of an administrative, like a neutral position. A lot of times we say in an admin section or in the office of the chief. However, you can't report to the chief because the chief's busy, the superintendent. But it should be in high enough there. And I'll say this, that whoever the analysis unit, the crime analyst reports to, that person. That supervisor needs to be fully informed of crime analysis, and in terms of that, whoever that highest sworn member is, and should be able to, I wouldn't say filter every request, but should be mindful of making sure the crime analysis unit is, I don't want to say protected, but is in a safe place to do their analysis without undue influence. There's always influence, I'm not saying that, but at least if we can set it up in the business model, in the structure of the agency. So I hope that makes sense. The highest as possible, that's reasonable in the agency. I mean, and I could probably, when we do work with police departments, one of the first things we do for stratified policing is we do an assessment of the organizational structure, of the analysis, where they are, how many resources, what what the crime reduction they're already doing, and we make recommendations. And a lot of times the recommendation literally is we look at what they have and we say, okay, where crime analysis is and where it should be based on what they're already doing. And I'll be honest with you, a lot of times they have them in the wrong spot. And if you have crime analysts and their whole responsibility is to support detectives, and a lot of times that support is not analysis, as you guys know, a lot of times that support is doing more investigative support that, that someone other than an analyst could do. But sometimes police think, oh, well, crime analysts should be, in the detective division because they're helping with cases. That's a different type of analysis than what I'm talking about. In that case, we don't want them in investigations. Now, that doesn't mean they're not helping with them. If you're 2 or 3, if you're in a smaller agency and, there's only 2 analysts to help everybody, you're helping everybody, but not to be in reporting in criminal investigations, because you have a lot of other things to do as well. So I hope that makes sense, and that answers, it's a long way to answer your question, but it's important. And a lot of times it's clear where the analyst should be and shouldn't be based on what the agency is doing. And for crime reduction, like I said, they shouldn't be in patrol. They're going to help everybody, but they shouldn't be reporting through that. Hope that makes sense. Any other questions?
Yeah, Rachel, I
Yes.
just got some messages about questions, because some people don't use the chat box. I don't know why, but for any reason. Following the last answer you gave, do you have any recommendations how we can double check that the leaders are working on our analysis also, so we can get something back, so we know when we serve them with our products, they don't throw it away or doing nothing? Is there any way to convince these leaders also, or finding a regular way to get some feedback if our analysis was okay or not, so we can work on that to make it better? Any recommendation about how we can work on that they also, that it's not only useful, so it's also been used?
Yeah, Sam, that's a really good question. And I, back in the day, when I was a crime analyst, for 5 years, we used to talk about how, and we did this, we would go to briefings, we would go to meetings, and we would send out emails every month or every couple months to say, hey, this is what we can help, this is what the crime analysis unit can do for you. If we send out a product, let us know if somebody was arrested so we can follow up and all that. And I'll be honest with you, that doesn't work. It doesn't work when, or it's not necessary, I guess, but it doesn't work when an agency doesn't have crime analysis as an integral part of what it does. So that is one of the things that you're talking about is that feedback. I don't think it's a crime analysis responsibility to get the feedback. I don't think it's, as an analyst, your responsibility. You may do it, but it's not, hey, I have to follow up and see, I got to chase down 5 detectives to see if somebody was arrested on the awesome pattern that I just put out. Why should you have to do that? You're doing it for the agency. When you have, and that's stratified policing, is a business model that says crime analysis is important. And it's not just about crime analysis, the process that everybody wants to know. It's not just the crime analyst that wants to know if somebody was arrested for this series. Everybody wants to know because it's built into the accountability, and the managers and everybody who's held accountable wants the chief to know and wants us to go that if somebody's arrested or if this pattern is closed down, they don't have to respond and they're seen as successful, right? So the analysts, then everybody's, oh, crime analysis, here you go, because now you're putting out information that everybody cares about. The problem is the crime analyst can't make people care about the crime analysis. Does that make sense? The agency, the chief, the leadership has to make them care because it's part of what they do, which is what stratified policing, I say this, and when you read the book, you'll see that's that organizational challenge, right? There's a couple things that with crime analysis, but it just in general, that crime reduction has to be important. And I'll just make the analogy there. We don't have an issue of when officers go on a call for service and they're done with the call, I would say issue that they close the call, they tell the dispatcher that they're done and they leave, right? And so there's a follow through. We know when they're off the call, they don't just let it hang out there. The dispatcher knows we're not, because they have this part of the system, it's part of officer safety, it's part of the policy, it's what they do and it's standard. And if you don't do that, it's weird, right? So that's the kind of thing we need to build for crime reduction and crime analysis, is that it's part of a business model that everybody does. And it's important to everybody, not because a crime analyst is chasing everybody down to let them know it's important. And I know, Sam, it's not anything you can do tomorrow. I think the how you can get people to value your stuff more and all that, you can make your products better. There's no question about that. But even if the best product in the world, if nobody's being made to do anything with it, they're not going to do anything with it, because policing, the expectations, they can get by without doing that. So in the end, what's my recommendation? Send a link to the Stratified Policing book to your leaders. I think if they can read it, at least and that's a reason, I'll be honest with you, Sam, that's why we wrote that book, is to, for me as a crime analyst, and is how do we get people to do exactly what you're saying? We got to have there's got to be a bigger purpose, but it's not just about a bigger purpose. We got to show them how. And that's what that book is.
Thank you so much for this answer. I do have also 2 other questions, but I can mail them to you later if you want, because there are also, as I could see, 2 or 3 questions in the Q&A box. Do you have access to this box?
I do. Let's see here. Being a student, we suggest first steps to take in order to get into this profession. In terms of this as a student, if you're in Europe versus United States, that would be probably different. In the United States, I think education is good. Joining the IACA, joining the EACA, obviously, you're here. I know in the United States, they do a mentorship program, things if you can volunteer in a police department, getting a advanced education. I know there's some master's degrees in crime analysis now. At Radford, we have a certificate in crime analysis. Doesn't certify, it's a certificate, a group of classes where we talk about stratified policing and crime analysis and crime mapping, and learn all that. So I think education, and I'll be honest with you, if you have the experience, if you have some education already, then just start applying to jobs, but also education would be good as well. Reading up, going to seminars just like this, and keep. But I think the mentorship program is good too, because you get insight, and it depends on where you want to live in the world and work in the world too. So kind of focus that way. Let's see. Let's see. Primary policing. Yeah. Okay. So Tanya Barrow, you talked about, I'll just read the question. In UK, we encourage using the VOLT model to look at hyper local issues, right? That situational victim offender location time. They've recently launched problem-oriented policing through Operation Nightingale. However, it's not routine. So what I'm guessing there is, Tanya, that it's maybe a project or kind of initiative where Operation Nightingale may be a certain type of problem that you're dealing with in your jurisdiction, and you're doing SARA, and you've got people, maybe there's a group of people, they're doing the analysis, you're helping out, you're really digging in, and you're doing that example of SARA, which is probably awesome. And there's a lot of good work. My husband and I are going to the Problem Policing Conference here in August in Colorado. And there's always really good examples of, and throughout the last 30 years too, but like you said, it's not routine. Why is it not routine? Because there's no business model. There's no business model that says, this is what we do as an agency. We have to set that up. Going and answering one call for service doesn't dictate how you get 100, 200, 1,000 people to answer calls for service, right? So that's why you need, the routine comes through structure, and it's not easy. I mean, you think about bringing problem-oriented policing with all those different strategies at every debate. It's a lot of stuff, a lot of moving parts. And one of the challenges that Roberto talks about is police have so many other things going on than just reducing crime. So much of what they do doesn't have to do with reducing crime in the police department day to day. So you have to make it realistic. You have to make it straightforward and systematic in order for them to do that, right? If everything is a big, huge problem-solving project that we name, like you said, Operation Nightingale, but if it's all these things that we name, how do you ever, it just seems like so overwhelming, versus if we can do a pattern and we can have evaluation, we can do this quickly, and then we can do something else, and we have a systematic process there, we can get a lot more done. All right, what's another question? Oh, I have a little clap. Any other questions? Let's see.
I already got a last one for you.
Okay.
So you mentioned that an analyst will never be replaced. What do you think about the danger of implementing AI into the daily analysis work? Could it be that once the analyst can be replaced because of using AI?
Good question. Well, I think they've been doing, algorithms and data mining and all that for a long time, right? So I think with the AI, just like, I mean, the idea is, as a human, we're dealing in crime, we're dealing with human behavior that's not perfect. We're dealing with criminal human behavior. We're dealing with police officer behavior of writing police reports and answering calls for service. And so there's a lot of imperfections when we're dealing with AI. And I guess, and I'm not familiar how AI would anticipate data errors that are happening in one jurisdiction over another based on this and that. I don't know how it would even do that. But in the end, to do an action-oriented product, you would always have an analyst at the end to say whether this is right? I mean, I don't know if you've seen, as a professor, the AI stuff came quick. So it came in December of last year, and by March in the college, we saw students using it to write papers. And I'll be honest with you, it was fairly easy to see. To prove is different, I mean, we have the detectors now, but it was pretty easy to see because the papers weren't right. When you give a generic and say, hey, write a paper about focused deterrence. Oh, AI does a great job. But I teach crime analysis classes, and there is not, I would bet a lot of money to see that an AI could do any of the assignments that I assign in my crime analysis classes, because they're so specific. And they're so dictated based on what the data are and the thinking and all that kind of stuff. But you can see, like a paper, you can tell it's kind of superficial, it's fake. It's, oh yeah, it looks good, they're citing things right and all that, but there's no substance there. And in my crime analysis classes, there's no way, no one has, and they haven't even attempted, because the assignments are so specific. What is required in crime analysis is so specific that the AI just can't do it. Maybe you can get close. And I'm not saying that is a microtime hotspot. If you say, I want to see all the residential burglaries that happen in 2 weeks right? Within a 0.08 mile radius. Well, we don't need AI to do that. You can set up a, we could do that for a long time now. But I would argue that the analyst needs to look at that, make sure that they're right, because it's not always right just about date and time, and then to do a bulletin with known offenders, but then you have to look at those. Are they the right ones? I don't want to put 6, I only want to put 3 because it makes sense, right? So I think there's a lot there that it won't replace. Now, it may help us get to a certain point, but it will never replace analysis, because I personally would not put anything out to a police department to have people do something without having a human being look at it. Absolutely.
Thank you so much. Really great stuff. And thank you for being with us. It was really a great presentation. And here is my wish for the near future. Hopefully, you will also be available for us to do some guest lectures for EFI. And maybe we can find a way to make some bigger trainings, like week or month longs, but we can talk about that in the near future.
That sounds great.
Once again, thank you so much for being here with us. And for the very end, I would love if Andreas or Michelle are still here on board to say the final words. Are you guys still online?
I'm here. I think Michelle is somewhere. Okay. Now
Okay.
Michelle is here. Thank you.
To you, Andreas.
Yeah.
Once again, Rachel, thank you and have a great day.
So thank you from my side too. So thank you for this great presentation and this great contribution. And really, again, I hope to have you on board in EFI for some events, for guest lecturing or for some courses, and in the ACA too. Of course, your experience here in Europe and in our institution would be really, really appreciated, and I'm sure really important.
Thank you. I'd love to, obviously.
Thank you very much again. Thank you to you all for the time you spent with us today.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Be safe. Have a great summer.
Bye. You too. Take care. You too. Bye-bye. Thank you very much.